Hello everyone, bringing you a video today looking at an iconic piece of British Army kit from the Cold War era. This is a Mark IV steel helmet with the 1956 pattern liner. Now this is the helmet a lot of people refer to as the Mark V. It is still the Mark IV, the shell is the Mark IV with the 1956 pattern liner. This of course would be the standard British Army combat helmet throughout the majority of the Cold War. It's a steel helmet and it was only replaced from the middle of the 1980s onwards really with the Mark VI in ballistic nylon, and the changeover had basically taken place by the late 1980s. The steel helmet had fallen out of use and the ballistic nylon helmet, the Mark VI, had taken over at that point. But nevertheless, it was the standard helmet for the majority of the Cold War and is quite an iconic bit of kit for that reason. Very recognisable bit of British kit, particularly when not scrimmed up. The shape of the helmet is quite a distinctive bit of kit. Obviously, essentially the same shape of shell as had been introduced as the Mark III during the course of the Second World War, and then was standardised as essentially part of the late war jungle kit originally as the Mark IV, and then went on to see general issue in the immediate post-war years. Without further ado, we'll get into the main part of the video now and have a look at this in some detail. So this is what I mean about the shape becoming less distinctive when these are scrimmed up. And this particular example isn't even that heavily scrimmed up. It's had the hood fitted, I believe, from a combat smock to give the first layer of camouflage. So we've got DPM cloth underneath here. Then a brown helmet net over that with scrim added, both bits of scrim scarf cut up and hessian as well to scrim up the helmet. And then we have black bootlace here, which would presumably allow you to attach local foliage to improve the camouflage effect even further. So when they are scrimmed up like this, and often a lot more heavily than this, the shape of the helmet is really lost. But this is the standard helmet you'll see worn later on during the Cold War in this condition, and often more heavily scrimmed up as well, just to say why they're difficult to identify sometimes. Looking at the interior here, one feature which is a bit different from the norm is the chin cup added onto the chin strap here. This is a proprietary item. It's not an issue item. It doesn't come as standard with the helmet, but it's just been fitted to the standard elasticated chin strap here. It holds the chin strap to the point of the chin. They do turn up occasionally in photographs. I've certainly seen a guardsman in the Falklands training on board ship who had one of these, and I've seen some other photographs showing them as well, and they certainly make wearing the helmet that little bit more comfortable. Certainly keeps the chin strap in place on the chin, at the point of the chin. So they could be purchased, and as I say, there's certainly some people I think have recalled using these as well in comments on the channel previously. The chin strap itself, however, is standard. It's just had this chin cup fitted to it. And this end here has been sewn over to make a stop for where the metal ring is fitted, and this then clips onto the clip on the helmet here to attach the chin strap at that end. And at this end we have a buckle which clips into a clip on the helmet in the same way, and the chin strap is just doubled back through that. You see we've got a ridged section here. I'll bring that into shot here. You can see there's a ridge section there which grips on the chin strap, so when you've adjusted it, it should hold its length. The main point of interest here, and we are going to look at one of these not scrimmed up to have a look at the shell shape and everything in a minute or two, but the main point of interest here of course is the liner, which is the 1956 pattern liner. So this consists of this inner cloth, elasticated cloth, and then if I lift this out of the way, you can perhaps see in here there's foam all the way around in there, and we're going to take one of these apart in a minute and have a look at it. This particular example has a date on the label here. I'll bring this up to the camera, of 1981, and you have the NATO stock number there as well, and the manufacturer of RM Limited. And you can see you still have the old rubber, if we get the light in there you might be able to see, you've got the old rubber head pad as you had on the earlier liners seen in the Mark II and Mark III steel helmets, obviously using the lifter dot to attach the liner. That was something that was introduced with the Mark IV shell. So that's basically how you'd often see these Mark IV helmets later during the Cold War, heavily scrimmed up. Or this particular example, as I say, they often go well beyond this in terms of the camouflage applied, but this is just one example. I'm going to bring in an example now which will show the shell shape a little bit more clearly, and also we'll be able to have a look at the liner as well. So this is the bare example we're going to look at. It's basically in this glossy green finish, as you can see, and it needs a repaint. Actually, it's had a bit of wear and tear to it, but you can see the shape of the shell there, basically the same shape as had been introduced by the Mark III. The differentiation of course being that the clips for the chin strap are mounted lower down. In the Mark III the rivets somewhere up here on the side, and obviously you have the lifter dot in the top there. You can see that inside a little bit more clearly. You've got the lifter dot to attach the liner. This was intended, or this feature was intended to allow the liner to be removed, and then the helmet could then be used as a water vessel for washing from, or things like this. Basically, it could be used as a basin. And that was part of the late war jungle kit. The logic behind the late war jungle kit was making this a little bit more versatile. Something that wasn't a problem with the USM-1, of course, with its liner, liner shell that fits inside. When you remove that from the pot, you just have a watertight pot. But if you remove the liner from the Mark III or the Mark II, you have to take the screw out, which leaves a hole in the bottom. So the lift-the-dot fastener introduced with the Mark IV was a solution to that problem. Of course, the initial liners for the Mark IV were essentially as per those for the Mark II. So you had a black oilcloth liner with this in the centre as the head pad. Then you get this, the 1956 pattern, taking over from that initial liner in the Mark IV, and then obviously will become standard during the course of the Cold War. If we look in here, there is a date. I'm not sure if we'll be able to see this very clearly. We get possibly see down in there 1967 in the liner there. I'm going to take this apart now and show you how the liner works. You notice in the previous example, the rubber pads around the edge where the liner fits into the helmet were made of black rubber. These are made of a sort of yellow foam material. Slightly earlier liner, slightly different construction. Now this attaches in using snaps or press studs on each of these parts of the liner here, just being fairly careful with it. There we go. And you can remove that part of the liner from it. And you can see the female parts of the press stud there. Makes it a lot easier to see the marking in there. Just lift this out of the way again. Obviously that's the tab for the lift. Hey, there we go. Remploy, and the manufacturer there will get the light in, so you can see. And then that tab I'm lifting up, the lift tab there, would allow you to remove this. The centre section is actually sort of hinged from this pin over here, and you can lift this out. And I'm not going to, because the lift-the-dot's probably a bit stiff at this point. I don't want to damage the liner. You can see that the actual sort of spider of the liner itself is made of this red fibre material, the same sort of material you see red ID discs made from, and various other bits and pieces. So that's the basics of the liner there. That's how it attaches into the helmet. The headband has this, I remove it from the actual band of the liner, has this inner elasticated cloth that forms, so obviously it's worn in like that and basically almost forms a skull cap around like that inside. So example of that here. These are usually green. I think this originally would have been, it's just faded. You can see that around the buttonholes let in for the press studs, it's probably originally been green and just faded to this brown colour. And then the inner band here has its own stamps. You can see 1967, the catalogue number there, front, and then the size. And this would originally have had, you can see the glue and the texture of the foam, this would originally have had that foam padding of about 1/2 inch thickness all the way around, glued on, which would be the full width of this band. I'm going to replace that at some point, find some suitable foam and glue it back in, make this helmet wearable again. You can see all the male press studs around the side, which obviously clip into and attach to the rest of the liner that's in the helmet there. So the idea of this is obviously to make a more comfortable liner where the helmet doesn't bounce around on the head as much, which was a problem with the liner design, which was essentially carried over from the Mark II to the Mark III and the early liner in here, the only initial difference being the lift-the-dot. This newly designed liner, which is obviously the 1956 pattern as already mentioned, was a lot better from the point of view of securing the helmet on the head, but of course being with the foam and the inner cloth and everything else, it is a hot liner to wear. It does trap a lot of heat, doesn't really aid in ventilation. So that is one problem with it. So that is the helmet and liner combination, which was essentially standard for British troops during the course of the Cold War, from the middle years of the Cold War onwards, through until the introduction of the Mark VI. Some people actually say the liner in this was better than that used later in the Mark VI, the Mark VI being less stable on the head compared to the Mark IV with this liner. But as I say, it certainly offered better protection and was somewhat lighter than the Mark IV steel helmet as well. So technology moves on. So hopefully you found it interesting looking at this, as I always say. If you have and you'd like to see more of this sort of thing, please do consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. And whether you're newly subscribing or you've previously subscribed, please do make sure you hit the little bell, the notification button down below. That will of course alert you when I upload future videos. If you really like my uploads and you would like to support the channel, you can. Both Patreon and PayPal are linked down below. And as ever, a huge thank you to everybody who supports the channel using those two methods. It's greatly appreciated, as I always say. Thank you all very much indeed. If you'd like to follow the channel on social media, you can. Facebook, Instagram and Twitter are all linked down below. And if you'd like to get in touch but you don't really use social media, there is of course an email address down below as well. That's everything for this video. So until next time, bye for now.